A man leaves the house at 7 a.m. and returns at 7 p.m. He eats dinner facing a television, then repeats that exact sequence for 40 years. The reward at the end is a conference room, a grocery store sheet cake, and a card signed by people whose last names he never learned. That was the deal. Most people still believe it holds. He told his children this was stability. Work hard, stay loyal, the company takes care of you. The children watched and said nothing. Then 2008 arrived and the company laid him off anyway. In 2020, the same firms called working from home a temporary accommodation, a favor. By 2023, they demanded everyone return, not for productivity, but because middle management needed to feel necessary again. Now it is early 2026, and roughly 62% of Gen Z workers say they would rather earn less money running their own thing than earn more working for someone else. Not a fringe minority, the majority. The instinct is to call them lazy, entitled, or delusional, the first generation in history to refuse how economies function. But there is a colder explanation hiding underneath. Maybe they simply read the contract. We are going to take apart how the employment conveyor belt actually works, why it was built the way it was, and why the most economically productive generation in history is quietly stepping off it without asking permission. The real story is not about work ethic or entitlement. It is about incentives. Watch the incentives and everything else snaps into focus. Picture the belt itself, the kind running through a factory. It moves in one direction at a fixed speed. Objects are placed at one end and emerge at the other in a form useful to the owner. The belt does not ask the objects where they want to go. It does not care if they have opinions. For decades, it was a good deal, because somewhere beat nowhere. But the deal was quietly rewritten, and almost nobody was told. Start with the first thing nearly everyone gets wrong about employment. Most people think it is a simple exchange. You give time and effort. The employer gives money. A clean, mutually beneficial trade. That mental model is what a 22-year-old carries into a first job. It is technically true and almost completely useless for understanding the mechanism. Here's what the relationship actually is. You are not trading time for money. You are transferring ownership of your output and everything your output produces to another entity in exchange for a fixed fee. That fee was negotiated once, updated rarely, and calculated to sit as low as possible while still keeping you from quitting. The wording matters. Ownership transfers. The fee is engineered, not discovered. Be precise. When a company hires someone at $60,000 a year, that person is not worth $60,000 to the company. If they were worth exactly that, hiring would break even, and no rational business hires to break even. The worker is worth significantly more. The gap between what they produce and what they earn is the entire reason the company exists. That gap has a name: profit. That gap belongs legally and structurally to the employer. This is not a moral argument. I am not saying it is evil. I am describing the structure, because once you see the structure, you understand why the belt was built this way, who it was built for, and why the objects riding it are starting to notice the asymmetry they were never invited to discuss. Anchor it in a number. The average American worker generates roughly $180,000 in economic value per year for their employer. The average salary for that same worker is about $60,000. That means the employer captures around $120,000 per year per employee in retained value above compensation. Again, mechanical, not moral. Value moves in one direction along the belt, and the people at the end are not the ones riding it. For most of history, that arrangement still made sense because the alternative to the belt was worse. The belt handed you health insurance, a retirement contribution, a legal identity in the economy, a reference letter for the next, slightly faster belt. It gave you stability, or at least the convincing feeling of stability, which functions identically until the moment it doesn't. People paid for that feeling with their entire careers. Then something shifted over the last 20 years. The alternative got dramatically better while the belt got slower, riskier, and more uncomfortable at exactly the same time. Suddenly you had people raised on the internet, educated by free video, capable of building economic systems from a laptop in a bedroom, sitting on a conveyor belt designed in 1952 and feeling accurately that the fit was wrong. This is not unique to one generation. There have always been people who stepped off, entrepreneurs, freelancers, traders, but they were outliers because the infrastructure for mass exits did not exist. Distribution channels, payment processing, manufacturing on demand, global hiring platforms, none of it operated at scale. Now it does. What once demanded exceptional courage and capital mostly just requires a clear head and a connection, which brings the second misconception. People think Gen Z is avoiding work. They are not. Many work more hours than their employed peers. What they avoid is the specific structure of employment, the belt itself. The reason is not psychological weakness or fragility. The reason is arithmetic. At some point, the incentive math stopped working, and once it stops, loyalty becomes an expensive habit with no payoff. There are 4 traps built into the belt, not by malice, by design, and each one is harder to see the longer you ride. Trap 1 is the salary increment illusion. Someone hired at $60,000 gets raised to $66,000 2 years later. They feel progress. A 10% raise, a good year. The number looks like reward. The reality underneath the number tells a different story entirely. Inflation ran about 6% over those 2 years, so in real purchasing power, the raise was roughly 4%. Meanwhile, the workers' output, now that they know the systems, likely rose 15 to 20%. The company captured more of the gap, not less. The person moved forward by 4, the machine captured 15, and everyone congratulated the 4. People stayed decades waiting for that to reverse. They genuinely believe consistent service will eventually be rewarded with pay reflecting their contribution. Sometimes it is, but the math requires 30 years for the compounding to feel meaningful, by which point the same 30 years of compounding on the alternative, building equity, building assets, building things you own, would have run in parallel and finished far ahead. The belt sells patience and quietly keeps the interest. Trap 2 is the credential loop. You start at $60,000, then need a master's to reach $80,000. You spend $50,000 on the degree. Now you earn 80, but your net position is negative because you paid 50 to add 20 a year. 3 years just to break even, then a certification for 95, then 6 years of experience for the director's seat at 120. At every step, the qualification for the next level is defined by the people already at that level, which keeps it conveniently expensive, slow, and institutionally controlled. This is not conspiracy, it is incentive. Institutions capture value by controlling access, and they control access through credentials. Every guild in history ran this way. Medicine, law, finance, and now the corporate professional class. The loop keeps the exits obscure. Trap 3 is the golden handcuff gradient, the one that catches people who should know better. As years accumulate, pay rises slowly. Just enough. Your lifestyle climbs to match. A nicer apartment, a car appropriate to your title. Restaurants, people at your level frequent. Then one day you notice you cannot leave. Not because leaving is impossible, but because your costs were calibrated year by year to your salary. Every incremental raise gets absorbed almost instantly by an incremental rise in spending. This is not weak character. It is the natural human response to more income. But it builds a structure where you need the job to fund the life, and the life was assembled specifically around the job. The belt does not hold you with a chain. It holds you with your own monthly expenses, which feel like freedom. Trap 4 is the most counterintuitive, the retirement structure. The 401k is not a wealth-building vehicle. It is a long-duration deferral system designed in 1978 and never materially updated. It takes a slice of your income, locks it into a fixed menu of market instruments, blocks access without penalty until you are 59 and a half, then releases it taxed as income, right when you most need it. The tax deferral is real. The employer match is real. I am not saying skip it. I am saying an entire generation was told this is how you build wealth. Deposit, wait 40 years, retire comfortably. For one specific generation, in one economic environment, with one set of housing economics, the advice was adequate. For someone 20 years old in 2026, the underlying math has quietly changed. Because the compounding on owning real equity in businesses and assets is structurally more powerful than compounding inside a tax-deferred instrument with limited options and zero liquidity. The 401k is a belt within the belt. It locks you in not just for the month, but for the decade. 4 traps working together, quietly converting a productive human life into a predictable stream of retained value for someone else. Here Gen Z enters, and here the story stops being a vibe and becomes a rational response to change conditions. The first generation raised on the internet did not watch their parents build careers. They watched those careers get destroyed in 2008, rebuilt with less security in 2012, performatively supported during a pandemic, then arbitrarily revoked in 2023. 20 years of data observed in real time. The lesson that data taught was simple. Loyalty does not produce security. The belt does not protect you. The belt serves itself. But distrust of employers is old. Every generation has it. What is genuinely new is what Gen Z trusts instead. They trust systems they can own. That single shift from trusting an institution to trusting an asset reorganizes every career decision that follows it. Consider a scenario I have watched repeat in a dozen variations. A 23-year-old works a remote knowledge job, software, marketing, writing, design, for $50,000 a year. Because the work is remote and they have learned to do it efficiently, the genuinely productive labor is 4 to 5 hours a day. The remaining hours go into building a second system, a newsletter, a small agency, a tool, a channel. After 18 months, the second system earns $3,000 a month, $36,000 a year, still less than the job. They keep both running. After another year, the second system reaches $6,000 a month. At that point, the calculation changes completely. Not because the second income exceeded the first, but because of the nature of the income. The two streams are not the same kind of thing, and that difference is everything. The $6,000 has no ceiling. The $50,000 has one, and reaching the next level means re-entering the credential loop. The $6,000 is also theirs, the intellectual property, the audience, the customer list, the software, all owned. The $50,000 vanishes the day they are laid off, so they quit. And within 12 months, a large share earn more than they ever did on the belt. The constraint was never ability. The constraint was time and attention, and the belt consumed both. This is a pattern, not a single inspiring anecdote. It is repeating across hundreds of thousands of people between 19 and 28 right now, quietly, simultaneously, in industries that look nothing alike. When the same behavior emerges everywhere at once, you are not looking at a mood, you are looking at math. If understanding how these systems actually work is useful to you, the real version and not the motivational, describing is the logical move. Now, the third thing almost everyone gets wrong, this is where it turns genuinely counterintuitive. Most people, even those who reject employment, believe the problem is the boss, the micromanagement, the politics, toxic manager who takes credit for the work. Those things are real and unpleasant, but they are not the actual problem. The actual problem is the unit economics of employment. When you work for someone, your output is bundled with everyone else's and sold as a product. Your individual contribution is nearly immeasurable, structurally averaged, and institutionally obscured. Two things follow from that bundling, and both quietly cap what you can ever earn. First, your pay is set by market rate for your role, not by your actual output. A worker who is 30% better earns maybe a 10% premium, not 30%. The marginal return on being exceptional inside employment is low. Second, the value of your exceptional work is captured by shareholders, not you. You think the enemy is the boss. The enemy is a structure that caps your individual upside by design. This explains something that confuses people, why some of the smartest, hardest working people earn salaries that are frankly embarrassing relative to what they produce. The belt does not pay for output. It pays for presence. It pays for the role and the credential that unlocked the role, and it pays exactly enough to keep you from leaving. A figure HR departments have empirically calibrated for decades with quiet precision. Now, a deeper layer most people feel but cannot name. Employment optimizes for predictability, not performance. Companies do not actually want their best people dramatically more productive than the average. It sounds insane until you see it. If employee A produces 3 times employee B, but both earn similar salaries, you have created a political problem. A learns their value, negotiates, and eventually leaves. The differential breeds instability. So companies develop cultural mechanisms to compress the performance distribution. They call it team player values, culture fit, not being a disruptive rock star. Mechanically, it is a system to make exceptional individual performance legible, manageable, and therefore capped. The rare firms that genuinely pay for output, parts of banking, private equity, certain tech, do well by their best people, but even there, the upside is bounded. Bounded because you are still generating value for someone else's equity, and the equity captures the compounding, not the salary. Consider Marcus, 12 years at a mid-sized consulting firm, exceptional by every measure. Highest client retention, largest deals, real industry reputation. By year 12, he earned $240,000. Senior partner track. During his tenure, the firm's revenue grew from $30 million to $90. He contributed meaningfully to that growth. His equity stake in that firm, 0. He was a senior employee, not an equity partner. In year 13, the firm sold for $110 million. The equity partners divided roughly $70 million after the payoff. Marcus received a bonus of $50,000 and a letter of thanks. He did not have a bad boss, he had a bad structure, and the structure performed exactly as designed. Marcus is not exceptional. There are hundreds of thousands of him in every professional industry. Genuinely excellent people who spent a decade building something and structured their participation to legally guarantee their exclusion from the upside. Scraps 1 through 4 combined, increments on a growing base of output, credentials to advance, lifestyle expanded to match, and 0 equity at the end. The Gen Z reaction is not outrage. It is colder than outrage. Not that's unfair, but I see the structure. I want a different one. What is building it cost? Increasingly, the answer is not much. Picture a 22-year-old on his 3rd day at Marcus's firm asking about equity. HR looks at him as if he requested surgery. Equity isn't something we offer at the analyst level. He nods, writes equity tokens, name, no, and starts designing his exit. That is not exaggeration. It is a documented behavioral pattern across tech accelerators, startup ecosystems, and entrepreneurship communities operating right now. The first question is no longer what is the salary, it is what is the structure. And if the structure includes no ownership, the salary becomes simply the price of buying time to build the alternative. That reframe changes what a job even is to them. Go deeper, because here it gets strange. There are 3 levels of understanding employment, and most cultural debate happens at level 1 while the real action happens at level 3. Level 1 is transactional. Work equals money. More work equals more money. Work hard enough and you achieve security. Most people start here and stay here for life. It is not wrong exactly, it just omits nearly everything that determines wealth. Level 2 is the leverage view. You notice not all work returns the same per hour. Writing one piece that earns for 5 years beats writing the same piece once for a flat fee. A system serving 100 customers without extra timescales, a job selling your service at a fixed rate does not. At level 2, you start optimizing for the force multiplier on each unit of effort. Level 3 is the equity view, and here understanding becomes powerful. You stop thinking about income, not because it is irrelevant, but because it is the symptom. The actual wealth variable is ownership. Do you own something whose value compounds independently of your continued labor? A salary stops the day you stop. An asset, a business, intellectual property, software, a portfolio keeps generating value whether you work or not. The entire difference between being rich and being comfortable is whether your net worth is driven by continued labor or accumulated ownership. Most employees live entirely in the labor column. Net worth equals years of work remaining times salary minus stop working and the income stops while the expenses do not. The wealthy, the genuinely wealthy, hold a different structure where labor is optional or merely grows the ownership. Here is the brutal statistic. Per Federal Reserve data, the top 10% of American households own roughly 87% of total stock market wealth. The bottom 50% own about 2%. The mechanism behind generational wealth is ownership, not labor. Not a political opinion, a mechanical description of how wealth accumulates under current legal structures. Gen Z saw this data fully accessible for the first time and drew the logical conclusion. Get on the ownership side as early as possible. The belt explicitly places you on the labor side, so either build an ownership position while employed or exit entirely and build one directly. This is not radicalism, it is math. But honesty requires the other half. Most people who step off fail. Roughly half of small businesses fail within 5 years, and the median self-employed person earns less than the median employee. Many Gen Z founders who left jobs in 2022 and 2023 are in early 2026 quietly job hunting again. The freedom narrative is real, the execution rate is low. This is where most commentary stops, either to say employment is fine or to say hustle harder and believe in yourself. Both are useless. The real question is why most who leave fail, and what structurally separates the ones who don't. The answer is not mindset, it is structure. Two piles of people leave employment. Pile one leaves to escape something, a bad boss, a layoff, a humiliation. They are running away, and running away gives no direction. They quit, spend 3 months figuring it out, discover clients do not appear from nowhere, discover that discipline without external structure is harder than expected, and conclude the belt was not so bad. Pile two leaves to build something. They identified a specific market, a specific value, specific delivery structure. They go not because they hate the job, but because they have something more valuable to build and need the time. Their exit is not escape, it is a reallocation of capital, their time and attention, toward a higher expected return. Same act, opposite outcomes, and the difference is direction. So return to the question, is Gen Z lazy, delusional, or something else? Something else. They are the first cohort to enter the labor market after the security argument for employment collapsed, after the cost of alternatives fell to near zero, and after 20 years of data on what loyalty actually produces. Median job tenure in 2025 is 3.8 years, much of it employer-driven. The 40-year pension is gone. Strip away the security and what remains is a structure that extracts labor at market rate and provides nothing a sufficiently prepared individual cannot provide themselves. The tools of knowledge production fell to near zero cost. Distribution is shared infrastructure anyone can access. For the first time in history, highly productive work can be done at scale by an individual without institutional capital. Being on the belt became a choice. 3 cold takeaways. First, audit the gap. Do the realistic math on your salary over 10 years, 3 to 4% raises minus inflation. Then model deploying 20% of your income into an ownership position instead. The gap between those two trajectories is where the real decision lives. Most people who run this calculation become motivated fast, not by inspiration, but because the arithmetic is brutally clarifying. Second, solve distribution before you build anything. Name 10 specific people or businesses who would pay for your exact offer. Have the conversations, get soft commitments. If you cannot name 10 buyers, you have a distribution problem disguised as a product idea. Third, distinguish income from equity deliberately. Income without ownership is a treadmill, not a belt. It moves your legs and never moves you forward. The belt is a tool. Tools are not good or bad, only useful or not, depending on what you build. The mistake is never using the belt. The mistake is letting the belt become the destination. If you want more of this, the systems thinking, the honest math, the real structures behind money, subscribe. The next one is just as cold, about something people get just as emotionally wrong.